Welcome, dear students, to the massive open online course on Political Economy 1. In today's module, we are going to discuss the political economy of gender inequality. The main objective of our module would be as follows. We would like to seek to explore the puzzle of male dominance. We will also try to explore how such arrangements interact with the domestic dynamics of men and women in our societies. We will also try to understand or use the standard tools of political economy to understand why patriarchy is so common in our societies. Now, if we try to put forth this topic, we usually see that in most of the times, women have usually been underrepresented amongst those who has always been counted as rich and powerful in the society. But if we look even at the ordinary people or women in the ordinary ranks of life, we also find that they're either dominated by their husbands or some other elder male members of their family, even to the extent of being dominated by their sons when they grow up. So we find in the life of a woman, she has always been subordinated by some male person. Now this is from this concept, the concept of patriarchy comes. Because patriarchy has been considered by many scholars as simply a part of human nature. It has become such an inevitable part of our lives and so very much entwined with our everyday existence that sometimes it is invisible to most of us that we are really dealing with a patriarchal society. We cannot ignore or ridicule the idea that patriarchy has ancient roots. It has varied considerably across time and place. Before the Neolithic Revolution, it had been observed that patriarchy was virtually absent in the hunting and the gathering communities. If we look at today, in most of the societies like women in USA or in the Scandinavian nations, we find that the young women out there in those societies, they are just bewildered when they even look at their mothers or even their grandmothers, hear their stories of enduring the patriarchal dominance, and they're just bewildered, plain bewildered by this fact. So we can say that over time, gradually, patriarchy is again losing its ground. And we try to find out the reasons. What are the reasons why patriarchy has taken roots in our society? And we can say that the most important cause for patriarchy are material causes that are responsible for this type of social organization. The changing economic and political arrangements has been instrumental in shaping these variations of subordination. So, in one word, I can say that patriarchy is not an inevitable part of our evolutionary heritage, like the development of linguistics or language skills and so on. It is not as if that it has been evolutionary in nature. So basically, patriarchy is a product of certain specific economic conditions. Now, next, we move on to what are the various methodologies that has been adopted to study this type of gender inequality. Now, social science on family and gender relations has broadly two methodological traditions. The first one deals with the macro-sociological approach. Now, in this macro-sociological approach, we try to find how organizations of political, economic, and social institution shapes the ideologies. In fact, they also affect men and women differently in terms of income, career, and political power. A special reference here in this context can be made to the Esping Anderson 1999 book published by the Oxford University Press, The Social Foundations of Post-Industrial Economics. In that book, Esping Anderson talks about gender relations, which are embodied in the sexual division of labor, compulsory heterosexuality, gendered forms of citizenship and political participation, ideologies of masculinity and femininity, and things like this, which profoundly shape the character of welfare states. So here, welfare state is a very, very important concept. Likewise, we have the institutions of social provision. That is, there is a set of social assistance, social insurance programs, and universal citizenship entitlements to which, as I just said, I refer to the term the welfare state. And these also have an impact on the gender relations. Until recently, two broad approaches to gender relations and welfare states predominated the literature. One, which saw states contributing to the social reproduction of gender hierarchies. So state itself, in other words, the state itself is responsible for the development of these gender hierarchies. And secondly, which saw states having an ameliorative impact on gender inequality. There is also a large feminist literature on gender and political economy, and this traces the macro level effects all the way down to the individual level. The internalized social norms can at times create constrained preferences. The second approach that is generally used is the microeconomic approach. Here we talk about how the division of household labor, fertility choices, and consumption patterns arise from considerations of household efficiency or the result of bargaining within the family. This is extremely important, and this point specifically I'll be explaining in this whole module. Now, when we talk about the division of household labor, we essentially mean that what is the nature of work that the male and the female in the family is going to do, and how is this division of labor executed, the division of household labor to be precise. Fertility choices refer to the fact that whether the man and woman in the household is willing to have children and how many children are they going to have. So this is a very, very important microeconomic decision in the life of a couple. And then we talk about the consumption patterns. Now, both these approaches that I just talked about provide valuable insights into the gender inequality and family policy, but they are limited by the focus on either the micro, which I just talked, the microeconomic approach within the household level, or the macro approach, the macro sociological approach that I was talking about, and there is a relative neglect of each other in both these approaches. So what we intend to do basically is we try to amalgamate these two approaches. Now we embark on the bargaining model where we try to synthesize these two micro and macro approaches. A systematic integration of the two perspectives of micro and macro by embedding a micro-level household bargaining model in a macro-level model of production framework. So we have the bargaining model in the micro level, in the household level, and we try to enforce this in a macro-level setting of production framework. And this we term as the bargaining model. In this model, the balance of power between the sexes inside the household is generally shaped by the macro level consideration that define the outside options in the evolution of a divorce or a marital dissolution. Now, what exactly do I mean by this? It generally implies that it depends on the macro level condition that is prevalent in the economy or the society, so that in the event of any sort of discord in the household, where both the man and the woman are supposed to be separated from each other in terms of divorce or anything like that, any marital dissolution, then whether the woman in the family is able to earn or not, is able to fend for herself or not, all these things become very important consideration. So hence, this type of macro level condition is going to also ensure what would be their bargaining power inside their homes. So, and this macro level condition obviously vary across time, across economies, across space. At the same time, the power of the man and the woman in the family or in the household bargaining, that also varies. So we need a model which focuses on the macro level institutions and processes, and we also believe that equilibria in the bargaining game can come only with common knowledge about what is the appropriate behavior. And this, what we usually call as societal norms, this common knowledge is exactly the societal norms that we talk about or we speak about. And the norms can assume an independent causal force in situations of multiple equilibria. Again, as I just said, that how macro level outcomes or macro level situation can impact the bargaining power within the household, in the same way, micro decisions by the household members in turn have significant impact on the macro outcomes. Like when some women decide to enter into paid employment in spite of the attending social criticism that she has to face from her family, from the society at large. Why does she do that? Why does she opt to enter into paid employment? Is obviously she is going to attain greater economic liberty or freedom. This also helps to improve her influence over household decisions. She thinks that she is going to get more autonomy in the household in terms of making decision. And this can also act as an insurance in situations of divorce or marital dissolution. Thus, once these type of women or one of these women enters into paid employment or opt for work outside home, this incentivizes all other women in the society to follow suit. So we see that the individual decision of some women is going to generate externalities, which is going to lead to cascading effects of behavioral changes amongst all the other women in the society, and that will shift the macro level equilibrium. We find that the division of labor is going to get altered, along with the public policies of the government getting altered, and obviously gender norms are also going to change. So in short, this was the bargaining model that I was talking about. So this bargaining model can help make sense of certain puzzling facts that we see in the family and the political economy at large. We are generally surprised to see the speed of change in the patriarchal norms, which philosophers and the social scientists by now were thinking that these type of norms are never going to change. Within just a few years, or maybe within just one generation, we have witnessed a majority of women or girls in countries as different like United States, Spain, Sweden. They are brought up to have completely different expectations about their roles in life than which was totally different from their mothers or certainly their grandmothers. So reflecting the depth of this change, 50 years ago, women in higher educational institutions were rarity. But today we know that in many places, women outnumber men in educational institutions in terms of pass percentage in various university and board examinations. And And this is mainly observed in the Western countries. Even the developing nations are not being left behind. So, from the perspective of our embedded bargaining model, this transformation marks a new shift, a shift to a new equilibrium with wide-ranging implications for the economy, for gender equality, for divorce, partisan politics, and obviously the gender norms. To illustrate this shift of norms, let us take certain examples. Let us look at the value that validate female subordination by the collective act of giving up on their economic independence. Now, it's a very strange thing, when parents understand that there exists a limited market demand for their daughter's labor in the market, they try to concentrate on augmenting the quality of their daughters, which are very much essential in the marriage market, because they know that the demand of labor, of their daughter's labor in the labor market is not much. So obviously they will try to enhance those attributes of their daughter, which is going to be important in the marriage market. But mind you, there is no strategic consciousness on the part of either the parent or the daughter in the above mentioned act that I've just said, and they're just following age-old societal norms. So we need to really wonder at the fact as to how societal norms always tends to validate economic efficient outcomes. People have a tendency to quietly accept such norms, but in reality, they are mainly trying to move on economic efficient outcomes. In most of the societies, girls are never told why they should be demure, docile, and chaste. The only thing told to them that, look, this is the perfect thing to do, this is the most moral and the righteous thing to do, and so you should be subordinative, you should be docile, and you should be sexually chaste. They are rewarded for displaying such behavior, and obviously they are punished or reprimanded from deviating from this type of behavior. However, we should keep in mind, and as we can see all around us, that economic autonomy for women is no longer a choice. But it is slowly transforming into a necessity in societies where divorce rates are on the rise. Concerned and rational parents should inevitably teach their daughters the value of education, the value of career, in short, about the importance of economic autonomy. Because obviously they are going to tell their daughters that you never know what is going to befall you in the future. So it is better that you keep yourself prepared and become economically autonomous. Now, this argument that I have put forward can be developed further to show how rapid transformation in norms can become a reality. The change in the macro level conditions can set micro level choices which do have large externalities. The next example that I would like to put forth in front of you is the gender gap in voting behavior. Now, related to changes in the gender roles in the rise of gender gap in voting behavior that we usually see in the last few decades. Say 40 years before, women everywhere had political attitudes that were very much conservative in nature than men. But today we find that in many societies, in many economies, in many countries, this pattern has been reversed. Now, how can we explain this shift in political preferences? How can we understand this? We again say that the answer lies in the interaction of bargaining within the household and the changing macro level condition. We try to explain why women in a country like United States continue to be vastly underrepresented in the political arena. However, they are making major inroads into the labor market, and even they also seek from the government different policies than enjoyed by men. And this is a very, very puzzling trend trend, because if we look into other countries like Spain or Sweden, we find that women in these economies, basically in terms of political representation, they are much ahead than the American women. But in terms of jobs or economic independence, in terms of gaining access to high-powered private sector jobs, they are much behind the American women. So again, we think that the explanation lies in the manner, the macro level conditions, in this case, the political institutions, interact with the micro level decisions in the household. We next focus on another very important crisis. It is called the fertility crisis. We see women in Italy and Japan, they are not having enough children to reproduce population. This is called a fertility crisis, and this has dire consequences for the funding of the welfare state, and obviously policies which are tending to reform the pension system, and questions are being asked whether more immigration is going to be allowed in these countries. These become very important questions in the context of the fertility crisis. Now, the only answer that we can put forth here initially is that women are having career rather than having children, and this is a very common view. However, if we look at the statistical data, what do we see? We see that the relationship between the female labor force participation rates and fertility had been essentially negative, maybe some 30 years ago. But now in many countries, it is positive. That is, that as the female labor force participation rate in some economies are rising, we find that in these economies, there is also a rise in the fertility rates. Vis-a-vis those women who are not going out to work, where the female labor force participation rates are low, we find that these women also are choosing not to have children. A very, very paradoxical situation. The explanation follows from the same underlying logic that was put forth for gender norms or underrepresentation of women in politics. It's the same explanation. The bargaining model, obviously, the same explanation that comes from the bargaining model unravels this puzzle. In countries with high divorce rates, women are willing to have children only if doing so does not damage their ability to earn income on their own whenever the need arises. Now, if we look at countries which has got a very high demand for female labor, either because of the fluid private sector labor market that do not discriminate against women, or because of the large public sector employment of women, they provide the would-be mothers with the greatest opportunity for combining family with continuous work. And we find fertility is lowest in all those countries like Japan and Italy, where there is a low demand for female labor and very high divorce barriers. That is, women are not allowed to divorce their partners. So the condition is least conducive to female bargaining clout. One might expect in these circumstances to give up the possibility of autonomy and embrace the traditional maternal role. Perhaps because of the diffusion of values from more feminist countries, these women instead opt for having lesser and lesser children. It is as if they're trying to eke out whatever economic independence they have by having less children. Now, outside options also influence bargaining within the family. Data have revealed that women who have got better outside options, like going to educational institutions or going for jobs, they do relatively less household work than women who do not go out to work. Those women, whoever who goes out to work, they have a tendency to pass on their work to their husbands, even if there is a slight possibility of her to work outside, given her educational qualification and the demand of female labor in the market. We find that industrialization has reduced the productivity advantage of the male labor, but the modern welfare state hits women with an unanticipated advantage. Among industrial economies, the more interventionist welfare states protect workers from easy layoffs. You cannot fire workers easily. So employers invest in their workers, form specific skills, and naturally they want to maximize their returns. They want to avoid investing in people who will leave them or who will take their accumulated human capital with them while leaving these firms. But women are generally left out of this game because employers know that women are more likely to get interrupted, to get their careers interrupted because of childbirth or other family work. This reduces the firm's prospect of making good on long-term investment in women's human capital. And the private sector firms in countries with robust labor protection thus tend to avoid hiring women and promoting women. Although this dampening of the female labor force participation is surely inadvertent, in most countries, in fact in almost all of Europe outside Scandinavia, it is still remaining unaddressed by the policymakers. Now, the market economies which has got the least interventionist governments are paradoxically very much congenial to female employment. Where labor markets are relatively unprotected, a worker's expected tenure at any given firm is considerably short. Workers will invest in their general skills that are transferable across firms, and the employers structure production around a fungible workforce. They do not invest extensively in worker training program, and so they do not worry that their training is going to go futile or going to go waste when these workers are going to leave them. Or if a woman gets the training and quits the farm to raise a family and bear children. So in economies where men are as insecure in their jobs as women, the playing field is more or less gender neutral, and family bargaining tends to be relatively egalitarian in character. So there are of course trade-offs. So here you see we are coming to a very, very interesting point that gender equality, if we are trying to look for gender equality, that will often come at the cost of income inequality or payment inequality. So if we want to have gender equality in our society, it will always give rise to income inequality in the economy. And whenever there is more and more of gender inequality, then overall in the whole society, you are going to have more and more of income equality. A very, very interesting result that we get here, and a very important trade-off for policymakers. So should they opt for a more gender neutral society, or should they opt for a more equal society in terms of income? So I come to my concluding remarks that historical and cultural differences in degree and the style of male dominance, they do provide intriguing clues as to why and how men have ruled the world for so long. The productivity of male labor versus female labor, depending on the modes of production, do provide a baseline explanation, no doubt. In the hunter-gathering society, the hunting and the gathering society that we had in primitive time, the division of labor between male hunting and the female gathering did not remove women from the source of their own food, should they seek to dissolve the relationship with their male partner. But we had the Neolithic revolution after that, which was also a patriarchal revolution because sedentary agriculture and herding shifted the advantage of food production to the male member. Because of his muscle, his brawn, the males were consigned the job of growing food, and women were consigned to a more docile role of supplementary and a more family-centric role. Women lost their social mobility when their family-specific investments in their children took away their economic viability outside the family unit. By contrast, man started to control resources with which he could dominate his family and also cultivate other relationships. The possibility of storing food, trading it in the marketplace, and conquering other markets or stores makes the agricultural society that came after the hunting and the gathering society, a more complex one. And that led to the generation of new levels of wealth, social hierarchy, and obviously type of fighting or military organization took place. So this increased the importance of marriage market for women and the strategic value of teaching daughters how to marry up. The resulting wave of gendered role of expectations is really patriarchal in the extreme. So social norms grew up around these agricultural economies, but survived into the industrial age, despite a gradual decline in the productivity advantage of the male or the masculine brawn that we say. And this is partly because of the stickiness of values or societal norms. Even if a woman could operate with a big machine, the idea was that how can a woman operate a machine? A very Victorian idea. And let us not forget this fact that it was the Victorian age which introduced machines to the world, and they were the ones who did their best to keep the women out from the Industrial Revolution, out from the machines. So eventually, the increased demand for female labor in post-industrial societies and the need for more and more of family income would inspire many women to push past the bars of this domestic cage. Once they did, an irreversible process of change was set in motion by the accumulation of hundreds and thousands of individual decisions of women, which in turn affected the decision of many others. So one woman making a decision did have a cascading effect on all the other women in the society, and thus we see how women slowly and slowly comes into the job market, into the space outside their homes. But again, we have the electoral roles, the market arrangements. They both reflect and reinforce the vastly different levels of demand for female labor. So we find that only in the Scandinavian countries, women has been brought into the labor force in numbers that can be compared with men. Partly the reason may be on account of a more flexible labor market, but also because the government had policies that were bent on hiring more and more of women. While in market-based economies like America, like the United States, women had also made significant inroads into the private labor market. But as I have already explained in my module, that they were left with a huge disadvantage in the American system. That is, there was a huge gender gap in the voting or in the political representation of women in America. So even though they are having economic autonomy, but in terms of political economy, women are far behind the American women, far behind the Scandinavian women in this respect. Here I have taken two extreme situations of Scandinavia and USA to explain my point. Thank you.